All right, welcome back to the Elias Makos Show, and a thank you to all of you sending lovely notes about the news of our second boy that's on the way. Going to be arriving sometime this summer. July 16th is the due date, to be precise there. But yeah, we got number 2 coming on the way. I've asked you for some suggestions on the name front. I'm getting a lot of wonderful names, but I just want to mention one thing. Those of you who are sending me George Costanza Seinfeld-inspired suggestions, like the name Seven, please don't. Our child will not be named Seven, and we will not take any suggestions that come from the television series Seinfeld. But I appreciate the kind words on that front. Okay, let's switch gears. You know, something very interesting happened on CJAD this week. I hope you're paying attention to it. We aired some of it yesterday because Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon was on the Aaron Rand Show, was on Montreal Now. And something very interesting in that conversation, because the thought of Donald Trump did come up during that conversation and how it's affecting separatism. You know, there is a thought process that, if Donald Trump is threatening Canada, that will be very bad for the separatist cause in Quebec. But when you listen to Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon this week, it's almost as if he's embracing it. He's relishing it. He's saying, no, this is actually a good thing that Quebec can actually use it to its advantage. So André Pratte's on the line. Of course, he's a columnist at the National Post, a former Canadian senator. He's been very integral behind the scenes with the Quebec Liberal Party as well. He's on the line. He wrote a piece this week in the National Post about something very similar. Mr. Pratte, André, welcome back to the show.
Good morning, Elias.
What's your take on what's happening in separatist circles, whether it's the PQ or the Bloc Québécois, when they have this Donald Trump threat and they're trying to turn maybe a loss into a win? What's your take?
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. I think they realize, they know very well that the threats towards Canada, and not only towards Canada, but Greenland and the threats to anyone who disagrees with Mr. Trump, that hurts their cause, because many Quebecers, even those who would be tempted by separation, realize that today is maybe not the best of time to attempt such an adventure. So they're trying to turn this around, say that, like Mr. Blanchet said, and Mr. Saint-Pierre Plamondon, that Canada is more of a threat to Quebec's culture than Donald Trump's America, that an independent Quebec would do better with its relationship with the United States that within Canada. I think this really is not very credible, but they're trying, because they know that I was reading some of the comments on the web yesterday after Mr. Carney's speech, and you had people who say, well, I'm a sovereignist, I'm a separatist, but I must say that today I'm proud of the Prime Minister because of what he did in Davos. So, I mean, it's obvious that it's not helping the separatist cause, and they're trying to make the best out of it. Right?
Well, certainly the best indication of that is the results of the last federal election, where we can see that the Bloc Québécois truly was hurt in this province based on those threats coming from Donald Trump and south of the border. So, I guess the question is like how the Bloc Québécois and the Parti Québécois react to that. And also, there are some people that say and suggest that the Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon Parti Québécois is not your dad's PQ, and they have taken they have veered towards the right, and some of that aligns with MAGA values. What do you say to that?
Well, I think it's partly true. It's always dangerous simplifying things to associate a Quebec or a Canadian political party with Donald Trump. I think, Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon is certainly nothing like Donald Trump, but it is obvious that the Parti Québécois of 2026 is very different from René Lévesque's Parti Québécois, for instance. They're more to the right. They're very skeptical, if not hostile, to immigration. Mr. Saint-Pierre Plamondon said last week that he was against Mr. Carney's opening to China because he thought that it would make Mr. Trump and the U.S. administration angry. Well, one of the reasons Mr. Carney's speech resonated so much in Quebec yesterday was because when people voted for Carney in Quebec last year, they voted for someone who they thought would resist Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. And they were maybe a bit disappointed over the last few months because Mr. Carney appeared to be making a lot of compromises in his discussions with Mr. Trump. But in Davos, he stood up for Canada and for middle power countries. And I think many Quebecers appreciated that. And of course, if the Prime Minister of Canada is popular in Quebec, it doesn't help separatists.
Mr. Pratte, André, I mentioned Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon being on CJD this week. Let's listen to a snippet of that. And I think it's very telling on the messaging coming from the PQ right now about Donald Trump. Have a listen.
So it's all a very interesting situation where I think Canada here uses a double discourse, depending on if we're talking about Quebec, Alberta, or if we're talking about Greenland and other nations. But in any case, I think we need to slow down and calm down here. And the worst thing so you asked me what Quebec would do? I wouldn't accelerate that kind of escalation. And there's a tendency, Doug Ford did it, and François Legault once said, you will see, I will make Donald Trump pay. There is no gain in accelerating that kind of negative energy and deterioration of friendly relationship for centuries. So let's slow down here and let's cool down in terms of not escalating, because nobody's going to win at that.
So there's a little bit of Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon, and the messaging is, I think, like every time we all get riled up about Donald Trump in the U.S., it's bad for separatism. He seems to be very aware of that.
I think he is. And I mean, the message, of course, everyone agrees that we have to maintain as friendly relationships with the U.S. as we can. They're very, strong commercial partners. We have a long-time friendship with the Americans. But I mean, it is not Canada or other countries that are acting to deteriorate the common relationships. It is the Trump administration. Mm-hmm. And at some point, I think Mr. Carney tried over the last few months to make all those compromises, and he came to the conclusion that it's useless. It just doesn't work. Bullies will not stop at someone who is kind to them. They will stop once someone resists to them. There are limits to what we can do on that sense, and I think that's Mr. Carney's message. We better associate ourselves as a country with other, similar countries to resist the U.S. Current administration. And this, of course, goes smack against the separatist discourse, which is saying let's separate Quebec from the rest of Canada and try to deal alone with Mr. Trump. And that's not Carney's message, and I think that's not what most Quebecers think, that we better associate ourselves with the rest of Canada and with other countries that share our values to resist America.
Mr. Pratte, I have to leave it there. I'm going to direct all of our listeners to head to the National Post website. Read your piece. It's entitled Why Quebec Separatists Are Embracing the Trump Factor. Come back real soon. Thanks so much.
Okay, bye-bye.
You're not imagining things. It's pretty bad when it comes to the REM. In the last 2 months, commuters using that new branch of the REM, guess what? They've faced 17 shutdowns during peak travel hours. Now, the company responsible for the REM, Pulsar, they're apologizing for users who've been left out in the cold. As the wet. Listen, we've had some cold weather, we've had some ice and that kind of stuff, but still, it's a lot of outages in a short period of time. Let's head over to Philippe Jacques, co-general director and spokesperson for Trajectoire Quebec. He's with us now. Philippe, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
What are your thoughts on just how bad it's been since the De Montagne branch of the REM opened?
We're very disappointed. Everybody had higher expectation, including the REM team, and it doesn't deliver so far. There's just, as you said, been too many shutdowns of more than 20 minutes, twice a week, let's say. So things need to be fixed very soon. They also have problem with their communication. People don't know when the REM is, if it's a slowdown, if it's a shutdown, when it's going to run again. what are the options, and talking about the option, there's not enough shuttle buses to take people, to make people able to move, to go somewhere else. Sometimes they wait an hour and there's bus coming. Sometimes they wait an hour and there's just no bus coming at all. So,
and I want to say on the communication front, and I've said this before on the show, I find it's unacceptable. You know, with the STM, if we want them on the show, generally speaking, we can get someone to come on. ARTM as well. The REM people, they've been on this show once, and it was at the initial launch, and they just refuse every single request for an interview. And, you know, they'll send us a statement, but I find that just shocking that you have a body responsible for such an important part of public transit that is like very opaque. They're not transparent at all, I find at times. Do you give them any breaks? It is new. I'm trying to look at it from both perspectives. This is still relatively new. Do you give them any bit of a break on that one?
About communicate, no, they need to communicate. They need to inform people of what's happening. They need to be on show to answer a media call. You're not the first one that I heard about that. They did just a few interviews. I think they should be going on the media more than that to explain what are the problems, what are the solutions. So I've been talking with them a lot in the last days and even since months. They work hard. Maybe it doesn't seem to be the case, but they work hard to fix problems. But for us, we don't understand why there's so many problems related to winter, as they knew there'll be snow this winter. It's the third winter of the REM. It's the first one for that new branch, but still it's the third winter for the Brossard branch. So the things should be better than what they are now. So,
And it certainly seems like they did so much testing. You know, they recently tweeted that they started the testing of the tunnel that's going to go to the airport. That's still years away. It seems like they've done years of testing on these lines. What do you think has gone wrong?
Honestly, I don't know. It's tough to say. It seems that I'm not an engineer, but it seems that some basic things about winter we're not taking in fact, but it's a real surprise. It's a bad surprise. As you said, there's been a lot of testing, even for the Montagne branch. They delayed the opening, and we were for that. We prefer to have a delay of the opening to make sure everything's fine. And we have the same thing for the West Island branch, that maybe better wait later in the spring instead of launching like in April when there might be some snow coming in. But as you said, they are already testing for the airport, which is more than 1 year from now. So it's very tough to understand why there's still a problem like that after 3 years. Because it needs to work. We need the REM to work, because when it works, it's a game changer, and people are also looking for what's going on in Quebec for the tramway. We want a tramway in the east of Montreal as well. There's going to be a high-speed train in like 10 years. So some people getting skeptical about, can we have efficient public transit in winter? And the answer is supposed to be yes, and it needs to be yes, so it needs to be fixed. And as you said, communication is a key issue as well. It seems there's a problem where there's communication system, but also to go on in the media and speak about the problem and apologize and work harder to regain the confidence of the users.
Do you think that the REM needs to do something for those who have been inconvenienced? Should they be offering something? I don't know if that's rebates or free passes. Like, do you have any? Are you making a call here about how the REM should make it right for those who have been inconvenienced?
I understand if people ask for something, as it's been the case for the strike, it's a different topic. But for the STM strike, there's been some, I don't know in English, recours collectif.
Yeah, the class action lawsuit, yeah?
Yeah, thank you. Class action lawsuit. There's been, I think, 2 were deposed for the STM. So maybe there'll be some with the REM. We understand people, they pay the full price, and it's not very reliable for now. Maybe they are looking at that and see at the end of the month what can they do about that. But we understand the frustration of people, and we fear that people who go to take their car, it might take some time. I think they'll be back when REM is going to be very efficient, because it's a game changer. It's fast. There's a lot of frequency, but it needs to be reliable, and then people will trust it, and they will be very happy to take the ride.
And we'll leave it on that point, because you really do need to trust the service that is going to work all the time, or like 99.9% of the time, in order to rely on it. Philippe, got to leave it there. Thanks for coming on.
My pleasure. Have a good day.
That's Philippe Jacques, a co-general director, spokesperson for Trajectoire Quebec.
I'm Dylan Playfair.
And I'm Tyler Smith.
We're putting loneliness in the penalty box by talking to some of our favorite athletes about the importance of friendship.
This is Bromance.
Bromance is brought to you by Charm Diamond Centers, proudly Canadian-owned and operated. Charm has been part of your love stories and bromances for over 50 years. And you can find Bromance on the iHeartRadio network or wherever you get your podcasts.
Well, if you're planning any big trips in 2026, there are a set of new travel rules that travelers will need to prepare for before they head to the airport. Digital authorizations for entry into certain countries, biometric requirements for some parts of the world, changing the way that Canadians will travel this year. Let's try and get the details. Barry Choi joins us, a money and travel expert. He's on the line. Barry, welcome back to the program.
Good to be back.
So let's talk about electronic travel authorizations. Now, I know a whole bunch of countries have these. United Kingdom is one. In the past, they have had this ETA, this electronic travel authorization, but as of February, I'm being told it will be strictly enforced. In previous years, if you didn't have one, they'd look the other way a lot of the time. So tell me about that. What's changing in the UK?
So realistically speaking, this is like it's a visa. They say it's not a visa. It's just an electronic form. It's a cash grab, right? So it's for a lot of countries. It's about $30 Canadian, £16. I had to get one last year when I went with my family to the UK. To be fair, a lot of other countries have it too. Canada has one. Canada has imposed it on citizens of the UK before, so it's not a surprise whatsoever. But I will say this, I think the key thing to look for here is, and this applies to any visa you're getting in the world, is to make sure you're using the correct website. Because I write about travel, I knew to go to the direct government website or to use the app to get my ETA. I told my wife to get it, and she literally just Googled UK ETA, and it brought her to a third-party site who just literally just fills out the paperwork for you. And they were charging like about £50, about $100 Canadian. So watch out for that, regardless, any visa, any kind of service.
So you'll end up getting the right document, but you could pay 2, 3, 4 times as much money than you need to spend on it if you go through some of those third-party sites.
That's literally it. And to be fair, these websites, they make it look super official. You go to the website and you wouldn't even know that it's not the official one. It's got all the forms. It's like, fill out these forms, upload a picture, but it's like you can do that through the app and save yourself about $75 Canadian.
Now, I know you called it a cash grab here. What do these countries call it? Like they're not going to say it's a cash grab. What's their defense or their explanation for why they do these things?
Well, like they said, it's an electronic travel authorization in ETA, right? They don't really need to give it a reason. It's their reasoning is that it speeds up the process, and it sort of does. Like we'll get to the next part about biometrics. It's all kind of streamlined. It's all tied together to a certain extent.
Okay, well, let's head to Europe because I think a lot of headlines go to changes at the U.S. border. Oh, the U.S. will start doing this, and they're going to take your picture and that kind of stuff. And we sort of like gloss over the big changes that happen a lot in Europe. So what's changing this year when it comes to traveling to Europe and biometric identification?
It's more like it's kind of like they have their own imposed deadline, which is April 10th, right? Where basically there's new border arrangements. They're going to collect your biometric identification and fingerprints and photos. And you kind of nailed it where you said a lot of Canadians were screaming when the US wanted to implement that. But this has been going on for many, many years in Europe, right? It's a little bit different in Europe in the sense that it's got some very open borders with the EU. Obviously, Brexit has kind of changed things up a little bit. But even I remember the first time I went to Asia in 2008, Japan was already collecting fingerprints back then. They were using stickers instead of a stamp on your passport. So it almost feels like everyone's playing catch up. So it may seem brand new to us, but realistically speaking, and I'm sure anyone can understand, is we're just in a digital world now. And part of the photos is just identification. So I don't know if anyone listening has Nexus. When I go to the airport these days with Nexus, as soon as I get to the counter, they already know who I am because they've got the cameras on my face and it automatically pulls up all my information. From a travel standpoint, I think it's fair. I think it's more efficient. I think it's better for safety overall, but I can certainly understand why people feel troubled by these changes.
These biometric identification changes, it applies to non-European Union travelers. Now, Barry, I know a bunch of our listeners here in Montreal actually have a European passport that they've gotten through their parents or for other means, right? So when you're traveling to Europe, do you know, would you recommend for our listeners that do have a European passport, should they use that to get around maybe some of the more onerous requirements?
I think generally speaking, it almost always makes sense to use that passport, right? There's just less delays. I don't remember exactly for Europe, but I'm almost positive they've got their own separate line and you just blow through it. I remember years ago, I was traveling through with my cousin. They're from the UK. We were going to Berlin. I had to stand in this long lineup where the German customs officials looked me over and they just literally walked through. Even just recently, I went to Hong Kong with my mom. She's a loco, originally from Hong Kong. She has a Hong Kong ID. And when we were at passport, she just assumed she should use her Canadian one because she's been in Canada for like literally 50 years, more than she's been in Hong Kong, and just said, no, you got to use your Hong Kong ID. So every country's got different rules, but I think if the listeners are from Europe and they've got an EU passport or even a UK passport, definitely use that one. Probably be just less work overall.
With Barry Choi.
And you can actually probably avoid that ETAs and those extra charges we're talking about.
That's another thing too, right? If you've got the European passport. With Barry Choi, travel expert. Now, Barry, when it comes to speaking of passports, to me, one of the joys of traveling is when you do present your passport and that border agent stamps your passport, and then you've got this forever stamp of your travels. And it's nice to look at, through the years, all the stamps that you collected in your passport. But that's going away in the EU. Tell me more on that front.
That is a rite of passage, and I 100% agree with you. I absolutely love getting that printed stamp. Do you know what I mean? The bigger the stamp, the better, even though it takes up all the pages of your passport, right? It just looks super pretty. But it's the same idea. It's all integrated. It ties to the biometrics. With the Schengen area in Europe, which includes countries like France, Germany, Spain, Belgium, Portugal, and Switzerland, you technically are allowed to stay up to 90 days in a 180-day period. And obviously, a lot of people who travel to these areas will kind of bounce between countries. So just having everything electronic now makes it a little bit easier because they can see exactly when you entered the country, how long you were there. So it makes sense. But from a consumer standpoint or traveler standpoint, the tricky part will be if you ever go to a country where they want to know where you've been in the last 5 or 10 years. So in the past, you could easily look at your physical passport and figure it out. And now you're going to be like, where have I been? Because it doesn't show up in your passport. Obviously, hopefully you've got records, but if you're a frequent traveler, you just might not know everything.
But in Europe, they're going to an electronic record, so that border agent will know because it's all kept. They'll know because it's kept electronically. Okay, and Barry, one last thing. Speaking of, we started off with travel authorizations for the UK, but there are changes now on travel authorizations for Europe. Well, changes coming this year. What's changing?
Yeah, so this is similar to the ETA in the UK. It's called a European Travel Information and Authorization System, or also known as ETIAS. Similar thing, you're basically going to need to fill out a form in advance, and then that kind of lets you into the country. Now, here's the tricky thing. We're talking about the UK ETA one. So say you're starting your trip in London, and then you decide to take the train over to Paris, whether for a day or for to continue your vacation. You're going to need 2 different ones. You need the UK ETA and then the European ETIAS.
Wow.
So you really got to be paying attention. And we're talking about those deadlines. You're saying how, hey, they may have looked the other way in the past. Now it's like, no, you must do it. The good thing is that most of these things, as soon as you do it, you're good. Like it should be processed within minutes, but that's not necessarily the case. And another thing to be aware of, say you've filled this form out and you've paid for it and you've done it, but then you forgot that you needed a new passport and you renew your passport. Well, because it's tied to your passport number, you would have to do it all over again, which is strictly just money, but it's, again, something to be aware of. You don't want to get thrown off. You don't want to be denied when you're about to board a plane.
Now, I went to Portugal last year, didn't have to pay a thing. If I do that same trip this summer, and how much does this cost, by the way? And do we have a definitive date where it comes into effect where you got to pay that money?
No hard date quite yet. They had announced it last year. They were saying sometime in 2026. The last time I checked, they're saying the later half of 2026. What does that mean? It's going to be 20 euros. That's what we do know, about $32. So it isn't a big deal, but who knows? With all the politics that are going on in the world, hey, hopefully they're still friendly to Canadians to keep it to 20 euros.
Jeez.
They can. I would imagine they can change the price per country as they feel like it.
So this is where I go, this is just I went last year, okay? I went last year, I didn't pay a thing. Now I'm going to go and you want 20 euros from me, I guess about like $32 Canadian. That does seem like a cash trap. You just want 20 euros from me, Eurozone. Just admit it. Okay. Barry, listen, thanks for coming on today. I appreciate it.
No problem, anytime.
That's travel expert Barry Choi.
I'm Dylan Playfair.
And I'm Tyler Smith.
We're putting loneliness in the penalty box by talking to some of our favorite athletes about the importance of friendship.
This is Bromance.
Bromance is brought to you by Charm Diamond Centers, proudly Canadian owned and operated. Charm has been part of your love stories and bromances for over 50 years. And you can find Bromance on the iHeartRadio network or wherever you get your podcasts.
Should the ultra-rich be taxed more? There's a movement in this country making the case. They call themselves patriotic millionaires. They argue the current system favors wealth over work and leaves government short on revenue at a time of growing pressure on public services. Now, critics counter that higher taxes risk driving investment and high earners elsewhere. So is taxing the wealthiest Canadians even more a necessary correction or a risky move with unintended consequences? Let's try and find out. We welcome Claire Trottier onto the program, Chair of Patriotic Millionaires Canada. Claire, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Let's talk about just who makes up Patriotic Millionaires Canada. I see on your website nonpartisan membership of high net worth Canadians. Tell me more about the collection of people making up this movement.
Yeah, so this week, as world leaders are gathering in Davos, we presented a letter with about 400 millionaires from across the world asking for a wealth tax, and that letter included 25 Canadians. And these are people who come from all kinds of different backgrounds, folks who started their own businesses, people who have inherited their wealth. So it's a really interesting group of people.
So make me the case. Make the case for our listeners that those who are ultra wealthy, in fact, should be paying more.
Well, right now, the ultra wealthy are actually paying less than everyday Canadians. If you take the instance of the amount of tax that you pay on your salary, Canadians who earn a salary, 100% of your salary is taxable income. Whereas when I make my money on money in the form of capital gains, 50% is tax-free. So if I earn the same amount as you do in capital gains, I'm actually paying much less tax than you do from working. I think that is completely ridiculous and needs to change. So
Claire, just on that front, right? So I take some issue with that, right? And I'm someone that, since I was 20, I've been investing. And I get taxed a lot. Like I look at the tax that already comes off the paycheck, right? And then I pay my bills, I pay my rent, I pay for my food, I pay everything else. And I've made a decision not to spend whatever's left. I made a decision not to spend it on alcohol, not to spend it on cigarettes or drugs. Like I made a decision to invest it. And I feel, wait a minute, I paid my taxes on the money that I earned. And now I should be able to reap the benefits of being smart with my money. What do you say to that?
I mean, I don't really think that when we talk about taxing the ultra wealthy, I would be surprised if you are included. I mean, congrats. That's like, wow.
I'm not a billionaire. I'm not a billionaire, but it went from billionaires to millionaires, right?
The fact of the matter is, I don't need to work for a living. I sit back. Well, I work in a volunteer capacity, okay, but I don't own a salary. I don't need to earn a salary because I make my income that I use to live to, buy my house, go on nice vacations from wealth that I've inherited. And it's just sitting there and it's generating income passively. And it's taxed at a lower rate than the amount of money that people who work for a living earn. I don't really see why I should get a massive tax break on the money that I earn And, somebody who's working hard as a teacher
but let me
is working very hard and is getting taxed on their full salary.
Yeah, but I'd give you the response to that. It's as a reward for being smart with your money. That would be the argument, right? Like, why should you pay a lower tax rate on that money? Well, you were smart with your money. You weren't frivolous. You didn't spend it on cars or luxury yachts or whatever it is. You decided to invest it, right? So, listen, I guess the other question I have is if money will solve the problems. Like, there's a story from the last week here in Quebec where the Quebec government, as a matter of fact, they spent $9 billion more on education over the last few years than previous governments. The graduation rate did not budge. So another concern that I have is that there's a thought process here, like if we just increase taxes even more, all of a sudden governments will know what to do with it this time around. What do you say to that criticism?
I mean, look, I'm not always in agreement with everything that the government does, and we live in a democracy. So I think that everybody should have a fair, say on what happens in our society. What I will say is that we live at a time where a small handful of Canadians hold more wealth than 50% of the population. And this is something that is deepening at an accelerated rate. We see in the United States what happens when the ultra wealthy gain so much access to power that they obtain political leverage and further enrich themselves. So I think we should be asking ourselves if that is the direction that Canada wants to head in, or do we want a society where the wealthy actually pay a very small proportion of their wealth and therefore contribute to, state coffers. If you look at the proposal that was put together by Gabriel Zucman in France, that was discussed a lot in 2025, that's 2% on, I believe, only billionaires' wealth. If you tax 2% on the wealth of billionaires, it is not going to have a demonstrable impact on their life. You mentioned yachts, etc. They will still have gigantic yachts and private jets, etc. However, they will be contributing a small amount proportionally of their wealth in order to actually make a contribution.
So I guess the other concern that I have is that if you go down this path, like people who are billionaires, I think most of the time they got there because they're smart. And what we've seen in other jurisdictions, they're like, well, okay, you're going to tax me 2%. I'm just going to move to another jurisdiction. So I'm wondering, realistically, if you increase those taxes, do you just not end up in a situation where those people leave the country and then you end up with less tax revenue, not more?
Yeah, no, that's actually not the case. The data is very, very clear on the matter. Norway implemented a wealth tax recently, and they did not see that level of capital flight that you're talking about. It just simply did not materialize. In addition to that, wealthy people are already quite mobile. So if wealthy people are going to say, I'm going to throw a temper tantrum because all of a sudden I have to pay not even at the same level as a working person, but a slightly more higher amount, I find that kind of blackmail to be kind of baffling, frankly. And finally, what I'll say is that the CEO of NVIDIA, one of the most, large and successful technology companies in the world, was recently asked about a proposal for a wealth tax that's being discussed in California and whether that would impact him. And he said that it would not bother him at all.
And and again, like the founders of Google left California, they moved, right? They incorporated in places like Texas and Miami for the exact same reason, right? So it seems like there's not unity on that front.
There might not be unity, but I think that at the end of the day, if the only argument against the wealth tax is that a small handful of wealthy people are going to be angry about it and will be sad, I think that is a fair price to pay for the greater good of all people. These wealthy billionaires that are accumulating this vast amount of wealth have also an outsized impact on our democracies. Something needs to be done about it. At some point we have to ask ourselves, when is enough enough? How much money does one person actually need? We have Elon Musk that is going to potentially be a trillionaire officially this year. When will it be enough for him? $2 trillion?
But you believe who should make that call? I mean, again, like I think it's all wonderful, but then you have to ask yourself, well, who's making that call? And like, so your group believes
I think society and democracy makes that call. If you look at economic growth in the 20th century, before the 1980s, the top marginal tax rate was much higher than it is today. That's tax on income, and that's not what I'm proposing. Just for argument's sake, because I get this a lot, there was a massive economic growth during that time, and the economic growth that happened was more evenly distributed throughout society. And so it was a policy decision that was made by governments to lower taxes on multiple fronts, including corporate taxes, and to not respond to the massive growth in wealth inequality that we've witnessed over the past couple of decades with policy tweaks to address that.
Claire,
these are decisions we make together as a society.
How much more do you send every tax season to the Canada Revenue Agency? They send you the tax bill, you send them more?
I mean, if I was being taxed, more, I would send more, of course.
But everyone can send more. You can say, you know what, I deserve to pay more taxes. You can voluntarily send more money to the CRA.
I certainly get that question a lot as well. I mean, listen, you're not going to resolve structural issues based on the voluntary generosity of a handful of people. That's not how things work. We need to have a system whereby everybody pays their fair share. I come back again. Why is it fair that a teacher pays more tax than I do? I do not think that's fair.
Claire, we have to leave it there. I want to thank you so much for your robust defense of your arguments and appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.
Claire Trottier is the chair of Patriotic Millionaires Canada.
I'm Dylan Playfair.
And I'm Tyler Smith.
We're putting loneliness in the penalty box by talking to some of our favorite athletes about the importance of friendship.
This is Bromance.
Bromance is brought to you by Charm Diamond Centers, proudly Canadian-owned and operated. Charm has been part of your love stories and bromances for over 50 years. And you can find Bromance on the iHeartRadio network or wherever you get your podcasts.
Well, it was just about a week ago that the Federal Court of Appeal ruled that the use of the Emergencies Act during the Freedom Convoy 4 years ago was unreasonable. The decision affirmed a 2024 federal court ruling that also rejected the use of the act due to the infringement of constitutional rights. Now, the act was used on February 14th, 2022, and it was the first time it was used since it replaced the War Measures Act in 1988. In a letter dated February 15th to premiers, then Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said the federal government believed it had reached a point, quote, where there is a national emergency arising from threats to Canada's security, end quote. Now, in their decision, the three-judge Federal Court of Appeal panel said that as disturbing and disruptive as blockades and the Freedom Convoy protests in Ottawa were, they fell short of a threat to national security. Ari Goldkind's on the line, criminal defense lawyer, legal expert. Welcome back to the show, Ari.
Always great to be with you, Elias.
What was your reaction to this ruling?
So I had a twofold reaction. The first one is, and it'll lead into the second, you don't have to support the Freedom Convoy, which many people didn't. I didn't at the time. You don't have to support the Freedom Convoy, Leach, Barber, what have you, to understand just how ridiculous the invocation of the Emergencies Act was. So I say that for the portion of your listeners, Elias, who still don't like the 2 weeks of honking horns. That's interesting that they wouldn't like it, but they're probably fine with 2 years of Hamas all over Montreal and Toronto. But that leads into point two. And you put the quote from the Federal Court of Appeal, a unanimous three-judge panel, that said, as you used the term, fell short. There are a couple places in the decision that are much more scathing than that. And they're in, and I read this last week, it's a very long decision, I think in the 240 to 250 paragraph range, where the Court of Appeal says, look, you don't have to have liked it. You don't have to have supported it. It's irrelevant. What's relevant is that this didn't come close. That's the interesting takeaway for me. It didn't come close. Even, Elias, where people say, well, hindsight's 20/20. Or it's armchair quarterbacking. They make the point that anybody with a modicum of a brain made back at the time, which was something along these lines. There was no threat to any Canadian life. There was no threat to this nation. There was no threat to our safety or security. This wasn't 9/11 or Hamas or a bomb going off. This was 2 weeks at its highest of obstruction and honking of horns in Ottawa and disturbing sleep. And the court, interestingly, Elias, and this is something that I thought was worth noting, also talked about the debanking. And the debanking and the treatment of people that were not honking horns and not acting violently and not ignoring injunctions of any sort. So this was a federal court decision of the Court of Appeal that upheld a lower federal court decision. And it said what so many were saying at the time, which is forget the fancy freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, charter. It was basically saying that the government was preoccupied with finding an emergency, and lo and behold, rather than all the other available tools in the toolkit to put a stop to it, they chose to hit the nuclear option, and the nuclear option was a serious infringement on a whole bunch of people's rights.
Ari,
that's the simplest way I can put it.
Yeah, and you brought up the honking twice, and I got to say, because I know people who lived near where the protests were happening, and it was making their lives miserable to listen to horns, and that, like, I remember that and saying, my God. Like, they got to stop them from honking their horns. Like, that's ridiculous for the people around.
I thought that too. I thought that too.
So I was sort of like, I remember, okay, well, they got to shut it down. This is the way they're choosing to do it. Okay, I guess that's the way. But then, when you do think about it in hindsight, it's actually ridiculous. How many different ways you can get people to stop honking their horns?
That's the very important point, Elias, and it is a point that has relevance. It's not a distinction without a difference. 2 years of Hamas, 2 years of these people who are nothing but Jew haters under the rubric of pro this or anti that, doing far worse for 2 years. And here's the kicker, Elias, with police escorts. That's the key. And here the Court of Appeal is extremely critical. And again, this is not hindsight 2020. These were a bunch of Canadians. Remember, Canadians, not Hamasers, not Jew haters, who simply didn't want to have to take a vaccine to be able to continue to make a living. You don't have to agree with them. You don't have to give them a medal of the year. But at the end of the day, that was the point that the Court of Appeal focused on, which is just how localized this was, and the idea that this was a national security that was going to take Canada down. Just saying that out loud, Elias, is so stupid. And the Court of Appeal, to their credit, uses language that, while it's judicious and judicial, is basically saying the government wanted a result, they created a result, and they were obsessed with finding that result. And I think it's a pretty good piece of writing, such a long piece of writing that nobody will read it, Elias, but it is a good piece of writing.
We're with Ari Goldkind, criminal defense lawyer and legal expert. We're talking about the recent ruling on the use of the Emergencies Act in February of 2022. Ari, this ruling, again, you mentioned the lower court ruled this way. This Court of Appeal has ruled the same way. Is this ruling so definitive? You mentioned the lengthy ruling. Is it airtight? Do you suspect that this would be appealed by the federal government and we'll have the Supreme Court weigh in?
So that's a great question, because the question that I get asked a lot since last week is, where do we go from here? And the other interesting question is, what recourse, if any, do the people that were really screwed by this, debanked, all sorts of other things, what recourse do they have? And this is a Liberal government under Trudeau, who's busy failing upwards with Katy Perry today in Davos, that wrote a $10.5 million check to Omar Khadr, one of the greatest scams since the Minnesota daycare arrangement. The question becomes, are there plaintiff lawyers or class action lawyers in Canada studying that ruling carefully, trying to see what can be done for a number of plaintiffs? I think the answer to that question is yes. Will the government appeal this? Here's my answer. Our tax money has been wasted beyond belief, not only by this government, by its legal team and lawyers. This isn't cheap. This is paid for by the government. There's a unanimous federal Court of Appeal decision. Do I think our government will still appeal? Probably. Doesn't cost them anything. But the fact that it's unanimous, the language is quite strong. The court seems very unanimous in it, and they address the number one criticism of the decision, which is, again, hindsight is 2020. I think the Court of Appeal deals with that issue very nicely by looking at the facts on the ground at the time. not just armchair quarterbacking or instant replay for NFL fans. So I think while there might be an appeal, I don't think it will go anywhere. And I think most reasonable people, not pure partisans, Elias, that's the key. Most reasonable people who themselves may not have liked the convoy can still read this decision or understand, Elias, the very simple definition in the Emergencies Act of what's a national emergency. And this doesn't even come close to it. And that's the nub of a very, very, very long Court of Appeal decision.
Ari, I don't know if anyone's ever told you this, but you are very opinionated. I want to thank you for coming on.
I've never heard this before, Elias. I'm devastated to hear this.
Ari, come back soon, okay? Take care.
Thank you, sir.
That's Ari Goldkind, criminal defense lawyer and legal expert. It's time for our weekly chat with a member of the administration over at Montreal City Hall. Our weekly City Hall segment. This week, we tackle artificial intelligence and how the city of Montreal is hoping to integrate and implement a bit of AI in the way it operates. Let's head over to Alex Teodoresco. He's the city councillor for the Loyola District in NDG and member of the Executive Committee for Artificial Intelligence, Innovation, and Organizational Performance. Alex, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me, Elias.
Alex, listen, one of the first movies I saw in the theater, Terminator 2. When governments start using AI, things go wrong. At least that's what the movies tell me. Why will it be different in Montreal?
Well, you shouldn't always trust what you see in the movies first. And where we are, our strategy for AI is very much on very, short use cases for the citizens. We're really not thinking about deploying an army of robots. I can reassure you on this.
That's good because sometimes they revolt. So tell me, what does that mean? Like what in these baby steps on how we integrate AI, where's the city of Montreal headed?
Yeah, it's a very complex and super interesting topic because, I want to demystify a little bit AI for our listeners. We're not talking about cutting edge research here. We're really talking about how AI can help our citizens and our services today to improve, delivery, the speed, the cost, the quality of everything that we do in the city. And so we're really looking at how we can deploy this, safely with the right governance framework. And I'll give you a few examples. We have a big strategy of AI that was already adopted last year, and now we're looking how to transform this into an action plan, really. And so we were not starting from scratch. We see other cities, how they implement it. We see how we can improve on that. And basically look at every little interaction that we have as a city. Probably a lot of us have been asking 311 or looking online on when and where to dispose of our Christmas trees, basically. And so that's something that can easily be done with just a chatbot, right? A lot of people use ChatGPT on a daily basis. And so there's no reason why we couldn't have this information of the city delivered the same way, where we don't need to talk to an actual human, where we don't need to, clog the lines, basically. And the chatbot could give us very easily the moment and the location of where to dispose of our Christmas tree.
And in your mind, is that like an integration with the Montreal app that currently exists? Because I do find it fascinating to use AI for that chatbot structure. But I also know, for a lot of companies that have tried to use AI for those features, there's been some false information, inaccurate information at times handed out by these chatbots.
Indeed, if you look at the technology 2 years ago, they weren't able to anchor it correctly in the proper information. But this has changed. This has evolved a lot in the recent development last year. So this is where we come in and we have ways to minimize what we call hallucinations. The beauty with this, giving the information that the information already exists on our website is just difficult for our citizens to navigate. They don't know which page to go to. And so we can provide a much more intuitive, natural feel, interaction with the city and the citizens. But it goes beyond just the interaction with the citizens. Even if you look at, because my role is also increasing the performance of the city, I want to tell you about the winner of a hackathon that we did last year. So a hackathon is basically like a really intense 3-day technological and creative challenge where a lot of teams come together and they have clear problems that they're trying to solve. And so last year we had a team that won at the city, and they basically won by trying to solve with AI something that takes a lot of time for our workers. Basically, treat the processing of notarized acts, right? So we treat about 25,000 notarized acts at the city, and it's all done manually. So you have a team of 10 people that basically look at every file, every PDF, and make sure that there's no error in them when they transcribe the big database at the city. This can all be done with AI today, and this basically allows us to save 90% of the cost and time. So you can imagine we talk about improving efficiency at the city to allow, to not keep increasing costs for a citizen. This is a clear winner of a use case, and there are many dozens like these that need to be looked at the city.
You do have my attention with, improving efficiency by 90%, especially in government. I think some of us will take that. Let me ask Alex before I have to let you go. I've seen other cities here in Quebec now, Quebec City, Kirkland, using AI to help with traffic and traffic lights. Are we moving in that direction for this city? Because I know our listeners would love to have traffic move along a little bit more smoothly.
Absolutely. No, we launched very quickly something that is very dear to my heart, which is basically efficiency around traffic, around the construction sites, especially downtown. And if you want to manage this dynamically in an efficient way, you need to have intelligent traffic light system. And we see other cities around the world, and even closer to us, that use this very efficiently. Quebec City has implemented with Google Project Greenlight, which allows them to reduce by 30% the idle time of cars at traffic lights. So there's no reason why in the birthplace of modern AI, which is Montreal, City Hall is not using the latest tools, to improve the lives of the citizens. So absolutely, we're looking at this type of project very actively with the task force on construction site management. And we'll have something more concrete to announce in the next few months for sure.
And Alex, just on that front, this city, we have so many great minds here. Like Yoshua Bengio is like the rock star of AI and everything that's done at Mila and on and on and on. And I've always thought, how is this possible that like all of these stories we hear from around the world, like it should be Montreal with the first, not lagging behind.
Music to my ears. This is why I decided to jump in the race and join Soraya, because she made sure that we use our champions, and they were put aside for way too long in the previous administration. And right away, the first week we got into office, I had already lined up all the meetings with all the champions, from research centers, universities, even the startup community. There's no reason why we shouldn't count on their support and their amazing talent to help us solve issues that have been, plaguing our city for way too long. So this is a major pivot from what you've seen in the past 8 years.
Well, we'll wrap up on that note, Alex. It's a lot more positive than me thinking about the Terminator theme song in the back of my mind. Alex, come back soon, okay?
For sure.
Alex,
thanks, Elias.
Take care, Alex. It's Alex Teodoresco. He's the city councilor for the Loyola District in NDG and the executive committee member for AI, innovation, and organizational performance.
I'm Dylan Playfair.
And I'm Tyler Smith.
We're putting loneliness in the penalty box by talking to some of our favorite athletes about the importance of friendship.
This is Bromance.
Bromance is brought to you by Charm Diamond Centers, proudly Canadian-owned and operated. Charm has been part of your love stories and bromances for over 50 years. And you can find Bromance on the iHeartRadio network or wherever you get your podcasts.